Hi everybody, Dave Rauch here with ProTech Building Services. I'm the CEO, and I'm here today with Kieran Purcell, who is a shareholder in the Epstein APC law firm. And Epstein is a law firm that covers Southern California and the desert. You have an office in the desert, right?
We do. We have an office in Palm Springs, and we have an office in the Inland Empire, and we have an office in San Diego. So we cover most of Southern California.
Excellent. And this video today is part of the Maintenance Manager, our monthly newsletter that goes out to about 7,000 people in our industry. Consultants, community managers, developers, and such. And we're looking forward to talking today.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave.
So first thing is, I know you have a passion for clack. And are very involved in clack, as you've just told me. You want to tell us a little bit about your involvement there?
I'm a delegate for the San Diego chapter of CAI, so there's 2 clack delegates in each chapter, but I also sit on the executive committee for clack, so on the statewide level, where I serve as the vice chair of the organization, and in October of this year, I'll become the chair. So I spend a lot of time looking at prospective bills, and if you think the ones that get passed are bad, you should see the ones that don't get passed. So we spend a lot of time looking at those, so you don't have to, and hopefully we get a little better result.
And you were telling me that there's few bills being passed this year because of the redistricting statewide?
Right. Yeah, so this is a little bit of an odd year that kind of going into 2022, we were thinking in light of the tragedy that happened with the Champaign Tower collapse in Florida last year, we would see a lot of bills, kind of similar to the SB 326 balcony bill on steroids, if you will, lots of inspection bills. And that we ended up not seeing that probably because a lot of folks, due to the redistricting, there's members of both the Senate and the legislature, the Assembly, who are running for re-election this year. And so a lot of this time has been spent doing re-election type of things. And also because inspections cost money and repairs cost money, and this is a year with, due to the pandemic and other things, inflation is so high that housing costs, which were already pretty high in California to begin with, are significantly higher in these days. And so a lot of folks who are running for re-election were nervous about being seen as someone who's promoting mandatory inspections or mandatory minimums for reserve funding or things like that, which might be perceived as sort of an anti-affordable housing thing. So we're expecting we're going to see a lot more of those bills come up in 2023 than we saw here this year.
And we're also going to touch on SB 326.
Right, not new, but it's been around for a few years, and hopefully you're already engaged in the process of finding an inspection team to go out there and do some work for you. You still have a little time left because the deadline's not till December 31st of 2024, but if you called up an inspector now, you probably get an appointment in about November or so. So be proactive, otherwise you might be very unhappy.
Yep. And before we get to 326, though, let me ask, is there anything that our viewers can do to help you with clack before we move on?
Sure. Well, San Diego, where I live, and other chapters are actively fundraising at this time of year, getting ready because that most of the clack members are volunteers, but we also do have a cadre of professionals that work in Sacramento that are our lobbyists, essentially. And so that we have a number of programs, the Bucket Door program, in which we ask chapters, HOAs that belong to the chapters to donate $1 for each door in the community to support clack. Or if you go to this different CAI chapter events, they have lots of fundraising. Tomorrow's or Friday's Day at the Races event here in San Diego or other events, you have an opportunity to support clack, and that would be really helpful. But the other thing, and really the most important thing, is when you get something in the mail from us, an email from us, it's a call to action. It says, click on this link and let your assembly member or let your senator know that we really want you to support this bill, that we would really like you to oppose this bill, and this is why. That's super helpful because we have a handful of folks who do work, but when we can get 500 letters out in a couple of days, that is a really powerful statement to the folks in Sacramento, and that's where you really can help us the most.
Excellent, and the technology has made that pretty easy too.
Yeah, and social media is even made that much more effective because when things go viral in our day-to-day lives, in an entertainment thing, it's amusing to us, but in the world of politics, where all of a sudden, one person sends out something via Instagram or it gets out on Facebook, and then it just starts multiplying, that gets elected officials nervous because they're all running for re-election this year. So that's a great way to participate.
Mm-hmm. And despite the lack of new laws, which is actually a good thing here in California this year, there are some things going on. I mean, we have the Fannie Mae requirements for
sorry, starting on the
loans.
high notes.
We have community manager turnover. We've seen a lot of a community association manager turnover. We've got quite a bit of roll-ups, community management companies being rolled up. You've seen quite a bit of that. And then I think we're still seeing a lot of Zoom board meetings. So that's going to continue. Right. So question is for you, Kieran, do you see any other things going on in the industry, or do you want to touch on any of those like Fannie Mae?
Sure. Well, I was joking with Dave a minute ago about that, we were starting kind of on a low note because unfortunately that's a problem that doesn't necessarily have a happy ending yet. And I say yet because on a national level, CAI and other organizations, I don't want to take anything away from CACM here in in California or ECHO, who are also working hard on this problem, but working hard to try to get an exemption from the Fannie Mae questionnaire, which requires essentially you as members of your board of directors or you as the community management team to certify the condition of the building. And basically, they're asking you to make statements which you can't possibly stay and potentially expose yourself or your organization to liability just to kind of get the federal lending program off the hook. And so that hopefully that will change and we will get an exemption to that for the current questionnaire responses, but then also get a better questionnaire written that allows them to meet the requirements of what they're trying to do, but without putting you in a challenging position.
Right, and I know that Don Bauman at CAI National Government Affairs is working hard to get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to toll those questionnaires. But in the meantime, I think the advice, the legal advice is don't fill it out.
Well, legal advice is talk to your legal professional for your community because there's different. It's the same questionnaire. Your community is different, and that you might be in a situation where you just did a significant project, and you can say our most recent inspection was in April of 2022. So your answer would be different than a 50-year-old community that hasn't had any work done. So I would say not a black and white answer, but talk to your legal team, talk to your community management team, and work with them to find out what's the best answer for your community. But I did want to touch on one thing, that there is a little bit of help on the way, hopefully. So on a national level, Congress is looking at a bill that would address a couple of things. One would be providing resources to associations that, as we talked about a moment ago, those inspections are the current inspection, the SB 326, as we're largely familiar with probably, it's not inexpensive to go out and do those inspections. And then it's not inexpensive if you have to go out and make those repairs. And so looking at finding some federal money that would be available to support that. And the other side of that is if you do have to go out and get a loan for that money, having those loans be secured under some of the federal housing programs in order to help protect you. So that there is efforts underway at a national level to try to provide some relief to homeowners on those two bills. We're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think that was just introduced.
Right.
So it could be a while.
2 senators out of Florida are working on that.
Yep. And then, so Kieran, you've seen manager turnover lately. I know we've seen some. Is it just COVID or is there something else in the air?
Well, being a community manager is a tough way to make a living. And unfortunately that like you see, whether you're on an airplane or out in the stores, you see people behaving poorly. And I think unfortunately during the pandemic, when a lot of people were working from home, they'd probably be in either a landscaper or in the building maintenance industry or being a manager were some of the toughest jobs to have, because you had people sitting in their homes looking out the window, and all of a sudden you had 100 more bosses in each community, and they felt like it was their opportunity to you were the dog they could kick, I guess, unfortunately. And so it's a tough line of work under normal circumstances. I think it was tougher during the pandemic, and so you see a lot of that going on, and across the board. And it's a tough time to find folks that people are moving industries, and we're seeing a little bit of a churn, but hopefully things will kind of settle down. And I think the key is to try to take some pressure off those folks and support them so that they can support you.
That's the whole idea, to make community manager's job a
Sure.
little bit easier.
Put the community
So-
back in community associations, right?
It's a hard job.
Yeah.
So question to you, you've been on a lot of Zoom meetings, I'm assuming, because we haven't had
Remember when
many
it
in
was
person?
fun? First one was pretty cool.
So-
Wow, this is awesome.
So how many Zoom meetings have you been doing a week?
This isn't a Zoom meeting, but this is my fourth meeting of the day, and the first three were all Zoom meetings.
Jeez.
So it's just unfortunately we're filming this here in late August of 2022, and the pandemic is coming back around again, and so you have folks who are leery of meeting and talking about things, and so that's just a common way to meet. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, and you probably already started seeing it in your communities, is doing the hybrid kind of meetings where there are people who really would like to meet in person. And there's other people who are concerned about it, and that you don't want to lose the participation level, which generally has been pretty high in many community associations, by not having the opportunity to meet in a hybrid situation. And so having the virtual plus the live opportunities, but it's a tough challenge to do. It requires some additional equipment and training for managers and things like that. But I think it's a nice thing if you can do it, because participation is generally a good thing.
Yeah, and actually that you're touching on a really important topic, which is training, because we are seeing a lot of new managers coming into the industry. And I know CAI has training, CACM has some training. We do training in-house with lunch and learns to new managers. So is there anything in that area you're seeing?
So one of the coolest things, now we talked a little about CAI, but I want to give CACM some recognition. Tom Freely and his team have actually got a really cool pilot program going in which they've worked with local colleges in order to create an educational track in which somebody who's interested in getting into the community management world can actually take college courses. And so one of the challenging parts about this line of work is that even if you've worked in apartment managing or you've worked in commercial property management, it's still a completely different animal than representing community associations. And so giving them the opportunity to learn about some of the basics in a college environment, so that when they go to work for a community management company, they're not starting at the ground level, but they're kind of starting a little further up. And so I think that's a great idea. And I just announced that through CACM earlier this year. And hats off to Tom for being innovative and come up with some great ideas. I think that's hopefully that works well, and hopefully it catches on, and we see more and more of that. And the more managers get recognition like that, and the more they get recognized as being professionals and getting opportunities to I think that's great for the industry as a whole.
That sounds great. Mainstreaming community management, and that's awesome. So that's good news. So let's see, unless you are familiar with any other big things going on in the industry.
Well, just to kind of jump back, we talked a little bit about the Champlain Towers collapse in Florida. And so one of the things we're seeing in some other states is, and CAI looked at it from three different components. It looked at it from the reserves funding standpoint. We talked about expenses, doing the continuous, routine maintenance that prevents you from having problems. And we also talked a little bit about the reserve funding piece in order to have money available to do that. And for those infrastructure, easy for me to say, I guess.
Infrastructure.
Inspections and also repairs. And finally, we talked about we haven't, but we should talk about the insurance part of that. And so those are the kind of three prongs that are being looked at in other states. And so in California, that's kind of one of the things we're prepping for here. Insurance, unfortunately, if you're going out and trying to renew your insurance policies in 2022, particularly if you live in an area where there's a heightened risk of fire, you know how darn hard that is to get. And if you do get it, how expensive it is.
Right. And
so that's something that's being looked at. So I'd anticipate you'll see more attention to insurance availability kind of bills. Obviously, the drought is still ongoing, and that we're going to see some bills directed at that. Affordable housing issues are going to be things. So those are probably three of the big issues you might see coming out of Sacramento in 2023.
Right. And Champlain Towers, that was a big deal. And I know John Epstein, your partner, was on the building inspection task force.
Right.
And there was three task forces, like you mentioned, and they came up with this report, Condominium Safety Public Policy Report last year. And these were recommendations in all three of those major areas that were made to state legislatures last October, and in the hopes that the states would adopt
Absolutely.
some of these best practices and recommendations. And so we're monitoring that.
We are, and so it's an interesting thing. Like you've seen some states where the bills have been passed, and in fact, one of them, Colorado, passed the bill, and then the governor vetoed it because of the affordable housing aspects of it. So kind of a mixed bag on that. But yeah, CAI did a very comprehensive report. They brought people in, reserve consultants, the insurance experts, and then also attorneys and engineers. So lots of different people from all across the country to kind of bring in their best practices and their experience about how to address these type of issues and make some recommendations, not only for the legislatures to try to make some decisions about how we can help resolve some of these problems, but also in order to give community managers and boards some best practices in order to, prevention is typically cheaper and much better than the cure. So trying to be proactive, working with Dave and his team, and I know you folks are active both at the new construction level and also with mature communities to come up with a maintenance manual. So having a plan, like what do you need to do, and then putting a budget on that plan so you can start funding it, and then going out and implementing the plan in order to hopefully prevent there from being future tragedies like in Champlain Towers, or like in the Library Gardens apartments up in Berkeley, California, which in 2015 had a balcony collapse, which ultimately resulted in that SB 326 balcony.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. I just did want to say, though, that you can get a copy of this at caionline.org or our website, protect.com. This is a great read. It's actually not as long as it is thick, but it's something everybody, I think, should take a look at.
Pro tip: go and search for the word summary, and then find the parts that are you're looking for, and work your way back. That'll save you some time because it's a big document.
But there's tremendous headwinds when only 9 states actually require reserve studies right now, and I think 11 have funding requirements, and only 3 states require a maintenance plan: Minnesota, Oregon, and California. But there's amazing recommendations in there, and it's unfortunate that it had to take the lives of 98 people to get the industry to start taking a look at reserve studies, reserve funding, maintenance planning, and maintenance programming. But such is life.
Well, there is a silver lining, though, out of that study, and that is that one of the things that you forget, because we live here in California, where there are things like SB 326, and there are things like every 3 years you have to physically go out and inspect your property as part of your reserve study. Those kind of bills don't exist in a lot of other states. And so one takeaway from the folks who are from California who participated on those boards is that the state of California is actually doing pretty well compared to some of our other colleagues around the country. And so you can take a little comfort in that it's not an inexpensive place to live. And we're over legislated in lots of other areas, but there are some good advantages. There are some proactive laws that are helping protect your community and this big investment you make in your home.
But it is a huge challenge in California when in San Jose, you have to have a salary of about $300,000 a year to afford a house in San Jose. I think it's $275,000 a year to afford a house in San Francisco. Down here in San Diego, I think it could be.
It's just the arm, not the arm.
$150,000 a year. So housing is housing in California is not affordable, and we have a big problem. And I think part of it is we really need to build more condos. But that's another issue for another day.
Well, I'd just say that one of the things you could take away from that is you've got to protect that investment. I mean, other than maybe your retirement, your 401k or IRA or whatever your retirement vehicle is, your home is probably the most important investment you have in your life, and to take care of it. It's kind of like if there's only one body or only one car you own, you'd take better care of it, right? Well, if this is your home, you got to do preventative maintenance and make sure you maintain it in order to prevent it from being unsafe, but also to keep the value in it.
Great segue to 326, the deck bill.
Sure.
So let's take a few minutes to talk about that.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned, 7 students died up in Berkeley on that, and the law was a result of that. And there is a lot of frustration in the industry. I guess, I don't know what you've heard, Kieran, but there are not a whole lot of inspectors out there.
Sure.
And the ones that there are, and they have to be a structural engineer or an architect, and the ones that are out there are very busy.
Right. Right.
And then what boards and managers are hearing is that those inspections are very expensive. So what do you hear about
Sure.
that?
Well, it's interesting when people find out that I'm on clack. I often get an earful about like, oh my God, how did you let that terrible bill pass? And what they kind of don't realize, like we mentioned a little bit ago, is that the stuff that gets passed is so much better than what could have been. And so the SB 326, the so-called balcony bill, is actually the second balcony inspection bill that came out. 2 years before that, there's an SB 721 that came out, which was the original bill.
Apartments.
Right. So that it exempts condominiums, but it's apartments and other multifamily housing with the exception of common interest developments. And that actually requires destructive testing or intrusive testing. So that much more significant than the visual testing required by SB 326. And it also has a shorter timeline that once you get your report, you have a very short period of time to go out and make those repairs.
Yep.
And which, untenable in a community association if you had to do a special assessment or if you had to go get a loan or those type of things. We're just getting a contract approved by your board. Go out and getting 3 bids and getting it approved and so forth. It couldn't meet those timelines. And so through the efforts of CACM and CAI and others, that we were able to get SB 721 to exempt condominiums, and then the end result was 2 years later, SB 326 passed. And so that one of the things that's odd about it, and I honestly don't entirely know why it came out to be this way, is that under 721, you can have either a civil or a structural engineer do the inspections, or an architect, or an A or a B licensed general contractor. So a lot more people. So more people means less expensive and easier to schedule those.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, in the SB 326 world, that it's only only structural engineers or architects. But you may see that changing because and I know some of the some of the engineers out there will yell at me if I tell this wrong. But the belief in much of the building industry is that other types of engineers, particularly civil engineers, could be involved in these types of inspections. So you may start seeing that. One of the things that came out of that study, Dave talked about it before, about the Champlain Towers, is that there aren't actually enough structural engineers or architects in the entire state of Florida to actually do all the inspections that are supposed to be done. And so having the requirements but not being able to enforce them doesn't really bring much value to it. So you might see some of that coming up. But I said so-called balcony bill a minute ago because it's really more than that.
It is. It's
exterior elevated elements, they call it.
EEE.
Right. And so it's going to be balconies, staircases, landings, walkways. If they're wood or wood-based type products, they're maintained by the association. Right. So if it's an individual owner maintained deck, that's not something you're obligated to do. And then also it has to be at least 6 feet above the ground in order to do it. So that's the first thing. If you find out what are the exterior elevated elements in your community, look at who maintains them, and look what they're made of and so forth to decide what you have to do for your inspection. Is kind of the threshold start to that.
And I think there's been a lot of programs for the past year covering what it is and how it works, and we are coming up to the deadline in 2025.
Correct.
But thank you very much for pointing that out, because I think it's general contractors could very easily be doing those inspections too, and I think it would bring the cost down. And there's a lot more general contractors in the state of California than there are structural engineers.
And I don't know what your experience, Dave, is, but you're seeing a lot of teams out there where the contractors are working with the engineers, because just like you would do if you were doing a construction litigation, that the engineers might point out what needs to be tested and direct the testing, but the contractors are generally standing right there next to them, and they're drilling the hole to put the bore scope in to look, if you have a soffitted balcony, or they're the ones who are putting things back together. They're also the ones who are putting the dollar amounts, helping you come up with the bids of like what actually needs to be done, because the report tells you what the issues are that need to be addressed, but it's not a bid or a proposal to repair it. So you need to go get a scope of work from a contractor and get a budget from that and go out and get it funded and so forth. And so the contractors and the engineers are already working hand in hand in this process.
Yep. And our point of view is, and this is, I think, really important, is don't let your decks have problems in the first place.
Sure.
If you maintain the decks from the very beginning, there won't be a moisture intrusion problem, because
Sure.
if there is, you catch it right early on and you fix it.
Sure.
You check to see that there's a 1.5–2% slope on the deck. You check,
Hopefully
make
away
sure,
from the building.
Away from the building, make sure there's no water coming off the gutters, down the walls, down
Right.
into the beams. So there's a lot of things that could be due to prevent problems, and that's our focus.
Well, and Dave's point is a great one, because that library garden balcony that collapsed in Berkeley in 2015, there were reports by the residents complaining to the landlord of the fact that there were mushrooms growing on the balcony. So you got to have a fair amount of water there for that. And so the fact that the landlord did nothing about it, and that the original person, the plans for the building were good, but the contractor cut some corners, and as a result caused that balcony to be susceptible to water intrusion and structural failure.
Two quick questions. I know we're running out of time here. One is, a lot of the associations in California, I think almost half of them are unmanaged. And do you feel that they're getting the information they need to deal with this bill?
I really don't have any way I'm not aware of any study that talks about that. But I would imagine in some instances, no.
Yeah.
There are a lot of resources out there, but do they know about them?
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing. But you're right. There are a number of communities, particularly, some of them are smaller communities, and so that they can't afford competent professional community managers to come in and help them. And some of them are apartment conversions. So maybe there are older properties that already had deferred maintenance issues before they got going. And so it's unfortunate. That's a tough. Tough
it's a
issue.
tough one, and I think we need to address it as an industry.
Sure.
Can't leave them in the dark, which leads to the follow-up question, which is, what are the consequences? What do you think are going to be the consequences if an association does not do the inspections?
Well, the bill contemplates that there might be some consequences, but they don't actually assign any. And so that I think if you think about how our industry works, that generally, if we don't police ourselves and do what the legislature considers to be the right thing, they come in and compel you to do things that are probably worse than what you would have been required to do in the first place. And so that this is an example of where if you don't participate in those inspections, it's not like the condo police are going to pull you over by the side of the road and issue a fine, but that you might see the legislature taking a much stronger approach on it. Think about locally in San Diego, Rule 1206, right? The San Diego County building industry, at least from the city standpoint, wasn't doing enough aggressive asbestos inspection. So the county came down and introduced a pretty onerous requirement on you. And so that's what oftentimes you see from the legislatures. If you're not acting the way they want you to act, then they'll impose a stronger requirement on you to do it. And so that I think you being proactive, and even though it's expensive to do, it's something that if you don't comply with these inspections, then I don't know what the SB 326 2.0 will be like, but it probably will be more challenging and more expensive to do. And so I would encourage you to try to comply with those now.
Well, of course, ultimately, if there is an accident on a deck and there haven't been the inspections, that's going to lead to serious litigation from the insurance companies. And of course, that word will get out. But anyhow, I think there's one last thing I want to point out before we wrap up here, Kieran, and that is that you were very active in the Navy, Navy commander. And are you still active?
Actually retired as a Navy captain.
Navy captain.
Served 30 years active in reserve service. So I retired in 2015, though. So.
And I speak for everybody here at ProTech that we appreciate your service.
Thank you.
I certainly appreciate your time here today. This was very informative. Learned a lot.
The Navy, I got a lot more out of the Navy than the Navy got out of me, I think. So I was very fortunate in that regard.
Well, thank you for being here today, Kieran Purcell. And thank you, everybody. Stay safe.